Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here, as always, to tackle complex sources, really cut through the noise, and hopefully deliver the concentrated knowledge you need.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are wrestling with a truly profound theological puzzle. I mean, this one really challenges some core assumptions.
It really does.
Was the greatest sacrifice in cosmic history an emergency measure, or was it actually built into the blueprint from the very start?
That's the core question for today's deep dive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We're digging into some specific, pretty intricate source material that asks, would the second God have become a creature, taken on humanity? Even if Hillel, that angelic figure often linked with, ultimate evil, had never sinned.
Right.
The traditional view, the one most people probably hold, is that the incarnation, the cross, it was all purely remedial, a reaction basically to the catastrophe of the fall.
Okay, let's unpack this central idea right away because it really is radical. The sources we're looking at argue that the sacrifice was, pre-creation design. It wasn't just a plan B or even, plan A formulated in case sin happened. No, the argument here is that it was a fundamental, necessary requirement for the completion of any universe structured with free will.
That's the shift. It really changes the whole narrative, doesn't it? From reaction to inherent necessity.
It completely reframes it.
Precisely. We kind of have to set aside that common picture of God acting after the fact. Our sources, they force us to consider this entire cosmic structure, one with free-willed creatures, as having these inherent moral and frankly legal demands that just needed to be met for stability.
So the core question isn't really about hell's specific choice then?
Not primarily. It's more about let's say, the physics of divine governance, specifically governance by love.
All right. So our mission today is to distill this really complex argument. We need to show why free will, just in its raw, created state, contained the inherent possibility of sin.
Right. The potential was always there.
And then demonstrate why the full manifestation of God's love and justice, which the sources identify squarely with the cross, was required to perfect that free will. And this is key, regardless of whether Hillel or Adam happened to fall on a Tuesday or, a million years later.
Exactly. It's almost like an intellectual examination of divine structural engineering. What did the structure itself require?
Okay, structural engineering. I like that. Let's start at the beginning then, the condition of initial creation.
Right. So to begin this journey, we really have to look at the starting point, the condition of initial creation, specifically concerning free will.
Okay.
When God created beings with the capacity for choice, the angelic realm represented by Hillel and the human realms represented by Adam, he granted them freedom. But, and this is crucial, this freedom as it was initially given was, incomplete.
Okay, that's the first big point we need to define for you, the listener, because it sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? We usually think of free will as the ultimate perfect gift. So why do these sources insist that this initial state of free will was, kind of by definition, imperfect?
Well, think of it maybe like this. Initial free will is like having a key that opens two doors. One door leads to eternal life through love, right? Mm-hmm. But the other leads to chaos through self-interest.
So you have the key, the ability to choose.
You have the ability, yes. But you haven't yet proven that choice. You haven't fully grasped the consequences down both paths. The source argues that free will is only really completed or perfected through love, specifically through the demonstration of selfless love over self-interest.
So before that demonstration happens, before that ultimate choice is really made and, ratified, it holds instability. Hell and Adam were inherently unstable.
Exactly. That's the core idea.
Yeah.
They held the possibility of sin. Before the fall, their free will was incomplete and imperfect. It's like the difference between potential energy and kinetic energy. Mm-hmm. They have the potential for moral excellence, sure, but they hadn't actually exerted the moral force needed to, solidify that state. They were morally operational, yes, but not morally final.
And the source material points to Scripture to back this up, right? This idea of initial yet fragile perfection.
It does. For Hillel, the sources often cite that description of him being perfect in all your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you.
Until. That's the key word there.
Exactly. That phrase, until unrighteousness was found in you, implies the possibility was always lurking there, just waiting to manifest.
So a kind of conditional perfection.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. It's perfect in form, maybe perfect in its initial design execution, but it possesses this hidden vulnerability, the capacity to choose self over others, over the law of love.
And the same applies to Adam.
The same concept applies. The sources bring in imagery from Revelation regarding Adam, who represents the church, noting that they were, quote, unaware of their poverty, blindness, and nakedness before the fall.
They were functioning but didn't realize their own fragility.
Right. They didn't grasp the depth of their inherent moral fragility. They were, in a sense, morally naive.
That distinction, functional but fragile, that's really key here. It means that both heavenly and human beings were structurally creatures who, well, would eventually sin.
It seems so, yes.
Because the free will they possessed was unperfected, and it just contained that latent potential for selfishness. It wasn't necessarily about avoiding sin altogether, maybe, but about managing the inevitable manifestation of that imperfect choice.
And this structural reality, this inherent potential for failure, it created a kind of urgency, a time limit. Because free will was unstable, the sources indicate that God set the seventh day as this crucial deadline, or limit.
The deadline for what?
A point by which he intended to complete free will, to eliminate doubt before sin fully manifested and potentially destabilized everything permanently. The threat wasn't just the eventual choice itself, but the constant, inherent instability of that created free will just waiting to choose wrongly.
So if the structure demanded perfection by this seventh-day deadline, the solution had to be immediate, powerful, and crucially pre-planned. It couldn't be an afterthought.
Correct.
So what was the mechanism chosen to achieve this perfection according to the source material we're looking at?
The mechanism is the cross. The sources are really quite definitive on this. The cross reveals God's ultimate love and sacrifice, and this revelation, this is the force that perfects the free will of angels and humans. It effectively reconciles all creation back to God.
So the sacrifice wasn't just a rescue mission for fallen humanity.
No, not just that. According to this view, it was the essential structural glue needed to transition the entire free-willed created order from that state of conditional perfection, that fragility, to one of eternal moral security.
Okay, here's the really provocative piece of the argument, I think, and where we bump right up against ideas of theological determinism. The sources state that God chose to use the actual failure, the falls of both Hillel and Adam, to establish the cross in the created order.
Yes.
If the cross was the necessary method, then the fall was simply the chosen, foreknown vehicle to bring that necessity into reality. Is that fair?
That's a fair summary of the argument presented, yes.
Yeah.
The cross moves from being, say, an architectural adjustment after an unexpected earthquake,
Right, a repair job.
to being the foundational cornerstone that the architect knew would require a certain type of seismic event, if you will, to demonstrate its full strength and necessity. The fall provided the ultimate, unavoidable demonstration ground, the stage required for creatures to fully grasp why they needed this and then willingly submit to the law of love.
Okay, this transitions us perfectly into the mechanics of it all. If the incarnation and the cross were structurally necessary components, what are the fundamental internal requirements of the law of love itself that demand such a divine sacrifice? We're shifting now from what happened to why the rules of governance necessitated it.
Right. To get this, we have to understand the operational difference between the law of love and, well, any other governing system you could imagine.
Okay.
In a created order governed by love, moral and legal authority isn't based on raw power. It's based entirely on demonstrated commitment. The sources present a very stringent rule of law. Only the one who perfectly keeps the law can possess the moral authority to command others to keep it.
That's a critical legal constraint, isn't it? It means God can't just issue the command from on high purely from a position of power, even infinite power. He has to establish some kind of moral parity.
Exactly. Moral authority. And that constraint is mirrored when it comes to judgment. If you are the lawgiver, only you, the perfect lawkeeper, can justly judge those who break the law. If that demonstrated moral authority is lacking,
The system breaks down.
the system collapses into skepticism among the free-willed creatures. They'd question the fairness, the legitimacy.
So let's explore the problem this poses for a divine commander. If God merely issues a command, do this, and then punishes the creature who fails, but he hasn't demonstrated obedience to that same law under the creature's conditions.
Right, under the same pressures and limitations.
And free-willed creatures will naturally question the legitimacy, won't they?
Absolutely. They won't submit willingly, or if they do, it's out of fear, not love. They might accuse the commander of hypocrisy or of imposing a burden he himself doesn't bear or hasn't borne. If punishment is then enforced, without that demonstrated moral authority, it ceases to be governance by love. It just evolves into rule by might, by sheer power.
And that undermines the whole point.
It undermines the entire point of creating beings capable of genuine free love in the first place. The only solution, the sources argue, the only way to maintain governance by love is for the commander to enter the created state, to become one of them.
So the incarnation, the second God becoming a creature, is presented here as the only way for the divine being to achieve ultimate moral authority and legitimacy within the created realm.
That's the argument.
He has to prove he's the ultimate lawkeeper by obeying the law perfectly, even within the limitations, the temptations, the potential suffering of the created state itself.
Yes, this need for legitimacy, it's fundamental, and importantly, it precedes any specific act of sin by a creature. It's presented as a prerequisite for stable governance in any free-willed universe operating under the law of love.
Okay, and this requirement is amplified, you mentioned, by the inherent challenges of conflicting desires among creatures.
Exactly, that's another layer.
Tell us more about that structural conflict. The sources highlight that free-willed creatures naturally possess diverse desires and purposes. And in any finite creation, those desires are bound to clash eventually.
Right, and that clashing, according to this view, isn't a bug in the system. It's actually a feature of the design.
A feature? How so?
Well, the idea is that God purposefully created the world structure with unfulfilled, sometimes contradictory desires. He deliberately placed creatures in situations of potential conflict, scarcity of resources, competition for status, emotional dissonance between individuals.
Why? To what end?
To force them to choose. It creates the necessary friction. Do they choose to love and sacrifice for their neighbor, upholding the law of love? Or do they indulge their selfish desires, breaking that law? This environment, this crucible of necessary choice, is where free will actually operates and gets tested.
So the world isn't meant to be some simple, conflict-free paradise where loving your neighbor is always easy. It's inherently a testing ground where sacrifice is essentially mandated by the structure itself.
Mandated by the law of love itself, yes. To follow that law requires yielding. It requires self-sacrifice, avoiding harm to neighbors even when it costs you something. Obedience necessitates enduring what the sources call the small pain. That's the phrase they use. Relinquishing immediate gratification, surrendering a personal desire, maybe accepting a loss.
The small pain? For what?
To achieve the great happiness, which is defined as the eternal moral stability and perfection of the cosmos, living under the fully realized law of love.
Okay, but this is where we run into the creaturely objection, right?
Yeah.
If I'm asked to endure pain, this small pain, or give up something I really desire for the sake of some abstract future great happiness.
Yeah, it sounds tough.
As a free agent, I might object. I might say the cost is too high, or the reward isn't guaranteed or isn't worth it. Or maybe I just argue the law is simply impossible for me as a limited creature to keep consistently.
And that is the crux of the moral test, that very objection. A creature with free will, precisely because they are free, will not genuinely accept a law that they perceive as impossible or arbitrary or unjustly imposed.
They need a reason, a deep reason.
They need to know, deep down, the reason why the pain of sacrifice is necessary. They need assurance that the promised stability, the great happiness, is real and achievable. And crucially, they need to see that the lawgiver believes it too. They need a demonstrable ultimate example.
Which brings us right back to the incarnation as the ultimate proof and example. The divine commitment had to be visible, undeniable, and, well, ultimate.
Precisely. By God becoming a creature, living under the exact same law he commands and upholding it perfectly, even to the point of accepting the ultimate sacrifice of the cross, it demonstrates absolutely unequivocally that the moral standard is manageable. It is achievable by created being.
It systematically removes the creature's primary excuse.
Exactly. It takes away the objection that the law is too burdensome, too heavy, or somehow impossible to keep.
Yeah.
If God himself as a creature can keep it, then the argument that it's inherently impossible for creatures collapses.
So what's the profound impact of seeing this divine example? How does it change the free-willed creature's perspective?
The impact, ideally, is voluntary obedience. Not obedience based on fear or coercion, but on trust and deep understanding. When creatures observe the commander of the law willingly living and keeping that law, subjecting himself to his demands, enduring the consequences of the created state, even suffering,
They buy in.
they willingly obey the law of love. It confirms for them that the law is good, it's just, and it's not ultimately burdensome even if it requires sacrifice. It shows the goal is worth the cost.
Okay, so that's the positive example. But the sources also discuss the need for a counterexample, right? Something achieved through the role of delayed judgment.
Yes, that's another important piece of the puzzle presented. God delays the final judgment. He allows Hellel, or Satan, the embodiment of pure self-interest, to essentially run rampant for a time, to oppress others in the created realm.
And that's not capricious. It serves a purpose.
According to the sources, it's pedagogical. It's for teaching.
Yeah.
Creatures get to observe firsthand the widespread misery, the suffering, the chaos, the sheer destruction that results when the law of love is broken wholesale, when self-interest reigns supreme.
It provides irrefutable experiential evidence. You see the ugliness of a self-serving universe, and you realize, maybe viscerally, why you must endure that small pain of sacrifice to maintain cosmic harmony and avoid that alternative.
Exactly. The resulting misery confirms the justice and the absolute necessity of the law of love far better than any abstract command or promise ever could. It shows what the stakes really are.
So the outcome is multi-layered then.
Very much so. The cross first establishes the moral authority and the manageability of the law through the incarnation. It provides the perfect positive example.
Right.
Then, the delay in judgment allows the negative consequences of breaking the law to become fully manifest, providing the necessary counterexample.
Okay.
And all of this allows free-willed creatures to grasp both God's profound love, demonstrated in the sacrifice, and his unwavering justice, the necessity of the law, simultaneously. And seeing both, they can then willingly choose self-sacrifice for their neighbors, thereby perfecting their initially imperfect free will into a state of stable, unwavering love.
So just to recap this section, the incarnation wasn't just a Band-Aid slapped onto sin. It was the essential, pre-planned structural element required for any free will, anywhere, to transition from a state of mere possibility of sin to a state of perfected, stable reality, which is defined as unfailing love.
Yeah, it's the core of the argument.
And the fall. It simply provided the ultimate, most agonizing, most public environment for this fundamental truth to be revealed with maximum clarity and impact.
Precisely. The stage was set by the necessity, but the drama was provided by the fall.
Okay. Since the cross was the chosen, necessary mechanism for perfecting creation in this model, we have to now analyze the specific roles played by Helo and Adam.
Right. Their specific actions, their sins, within this chosen creation structure, they weren't arbitrary flukes. They were instrumental, according to the sources, in setting the stage for the required sacrifice.
Now, this is where I think we need to address the determinism question again, maybe more directly. If the cross was the chosen path, and Helo's fall was necessary to set the stage, how do the sources maintain that Hela still possessed genuine free will? Doesn't this structure seem to make God the author of sin, orchestrating the failure to get a predetermined result?
That is the crucial tension, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the sources try to address it. They maintain free will primarily by emphasizing God's foreknowledge and his structural choice, rather than direct causation.
Okay, explain that distinction. Foreknowledge versus causation.
God knew, based on the inherent nature of imperfect free will that we discussed earlier, that state of fragility.
Section I, right.
Right. He knew that some creature, given that initial imperfect state, would eventually choose self-interest over love. He then decided to use that foreknown failure, Hela's specific, foreseen choice, to establish the necessary structure of the cross.
So Hel still chose freely.
Hel still chose freely, according to his own nature and desires. But God chose to build his ultimate plan around that known, anticipated choice, rather than preventing it or choosing a different path altogether.
Okay. Let's walk through that logical chain again. The 6 steps the sources use to really cement Helel's necessity in this specific creation structure, the one where the cross is the completion mechanism.
Okay, it's presented as a pretty tight theological syllogism.
Step 1.
1. If Hel does not fall, he does not mislead Adam. Hel, as the initiator of high-level intelligent evil, was required to bring the kind of temptation necessary for the human fall.
Okay. 2.
2. If Adam is not misled, he does not sin. We'll get into Adam's specific limitations shortly, but the key here is that Adam, in this model, required an external malicious prompt. He wouldn't just fall on his own initiative.
3.
3. If Adam does not sin, he cannot be redeemed or atoned for. The whole legal mechanism of atonement requires the manifestation of sin to operate. You can't atone for something that hasn't happened or isn't known.
Makes sense. 4.
4. If Adam is not redeemed, God's love is not proven in this specific way. The cross, as the ultimate demonstration of love through redemption, loses its primary stage, its main object lesson, if there's no one specific to redeem in that manner.
Okay. 5.
5. If Hela does not fall, the cross cannot be established as the means of redemption. Hela is the necessary catalyst for the event Adam's fall, that triggers the cross's manifestation within the created order.
And therefore 6.
6. Therefore, if the cross is the chosen method to complete free will in this creation, hell must fall.
Wow, that 6th point is really stunning when you lay it out like that. It reframes Hell not just as a cosmic bad guy, but as a necessary, though obviously tragic actor whose actions were required for the ultimate demonstration of love and justice to occur.
His failure became integral to the success of the pre-planned completion mechanism. That's the argument.
But the sources still try to preserve his accountability. They don't just let him off the hook as a pawn.
No, they don't. While emphasizing his necessity in this chosen path, they still offer some theological wiggle room. They discuss alternatives God could have theoretically used if hell had, hypothetically, chosen differently.
And discussing alternatives reinforces the idea that Hel's choice was real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suggests his path wasn't the only conceivable path, just the one God foreknew and chose to work with. This is essential for distinguishing this kind of predestination from outright fatalism.
So what were these hypothetical alternatives?
Well, the sources propose two main theoretical possibilities. Option 1. If hell had, against foreknowledge, chosen differently, God would have had to have pre-planned a completely different non-cross method to complete creation.
Which implies the cross itself isn't absolutely necessary in all possible worlds, only in this one.
Only necessary given the combination of the law of love and the foreknowledge of hell's specific choice. Yes. Option 2 is maybe more direct. God could have simply used his divine foreknowledge to replace Hell with a different angelic creature, one who would choose to fall.
So the act of falling, the role itself was necessary, but the specific actor, Hell, was potentially replaceable.
That's the implication of option 2. It confirms the necessity of the fall within this structure, but perhaps the replaceability of the individual faller.
So the fall was structurally necessary for the cross to manifest, but Hell himself was only necessary because God chose to utilize his foreknown failure instead of, say, intervening or substituting another agent. He remains culpable because he made the choice freely, even if God's plan perfectly accommodated and utilized that choice.
Precisely. Hell became the necessary agent of change in this specific creation, fulfilling a role that was always required by the chosen architecture, based on his own foreseen choices.
Okay, now let's turn to Adam. Because his role, interestingly, seems to be characterized by limitation, in contrast to Hell's initiating power. And paradoxically, this limitation is presented as his saving grace. Why did Adam, representing humanity, require misleading by Hell? Why couldn't he fall on his own?
Yeah, the source makes a really crucial distinction here about the depth of light or moral knowledge that Adam possessed at creation.
Okay.
Adam was created, in this view, with insufficient light to initiate the fall purely on his own steam, so to speak. He couldn't just maximize his free will to the point of inventing or choosing ultimate evil from scratch. He required that external temptation, that misleading push from Hell.
And why is this limitation so vital? Why couldn't Adam just be given full, complete moral awareness and then choose freely from that position? Wouldn't that be a truer test?
But this is where we encounter what the sources frame as the repentance light paradox.
Okay, the repentance light paradox, what's that?
The sources argue that if Adam had received such powerful, absolute moral light, the kind of perfect knowledge that would allow him to deliberately choose ultimate evil without needing any external temptation,
Yes.
then his sin would have been absolute willful. And crucially, beyond repentance.
Beyond repentance, why?
Because such a sin, committed in full light and knowledge, would be analogous to, quote, crucifying the Son of God again. It would represent a state of irredeemable moral suicide, a complete and final rejection made with eyes wide open.
That is profound.
Right.
So his very limitation, his need for a tempter, his susceptibility, actually preserved his capacity for redemption.
That's the argument. His relative weakness, his need for an external push, meant his sin was committed in a state of greater moral vulnerability or perhaps ignorance compared to Hillel's. And this state allowed for atonement. If he had sinned with the full light and power potentially available to a being like Hillel, he might have been irredeemable.
So Adam was, in a way, designed to be susceptible to external temptation.
The sources suggest that, yes, designed in such a way that his subsequent sin was not absolute, not final, and therefore could be covered by the cross, the very cross that was established by the sequence of events his fall initiated. It's a tightly woven argument.
Okay. Now, furthermore, God uses the fallen Adam, post-fall Adam, to achieve another crucial piece of proof. Universal proof about the sincerity and manageability of the commandments. How does Adam's body of death serve as a proof mechanism?
Right. After the fall, Adam received this body of death. The sources describe it poetically as being prone to thorns and thistles, which they interpret metaphorically. Meaning carnal desires, sickness, weakness, the constant internal struggle against the self, against entropy, this diminished state, this burdened existence, paradoxically, makes the proof that comes from Adam more powerful, not less.
Why more powerful? That seems counterintuitive again.
Because the crucial proof lies in the observation that Adam still keeps the commandments, still strives to love God and neighbor, even in this diminished, struggling body, a body constantly wrestling with these internal thorns and thistles. If the law of love can be upheld, even imperfectly, under the worst, most burdensome physical and spiritual conditions imaginable, well, then its fundamental manageability is proven universally.
I get the comparative advantage now. If a creature like fallen Adam can struggle towards obedience in a body that's practically warring against him, then creatures without that intense burden like unfallen angels, or perhaps perfected future beings, they can keep the law even more easily. It sets the standard of achievability at the lowest, most difficult point, thereby validating the law's fairness for all beings across the board.
That is the ultimate stress test, isn't it? To prove the law of love isn't inherently too burdensome, God had to show it could be pursued even by those struggling against mortality and internal corruption itself. The sources explicitly argue that the proof would be far less convincing if it were only demonstrated in some perfect conflict-free state.
Okay. And finally, on Adam, there's the necessity of manifestation. Why couldn't God just forgive hidden sin? Why did Adam's sin, his nakedness, have to be exposed?
Because the effectiveness of the cross, according to this framework, depends on universal understanding and ratification by all free will beings. Atonement can't really happen effectively for a sin that remains hidden or unmanifested, what the sources refer to as that state of nakedness without shame before the fall.
It needs to be brought into the open.
Yes. The full reality of sin, the misery it causes, the suffering, the utter chaos of unchecked self-interest, it has to be exposed, made plain for all to see. Only then can the depth of the atonement, the sheer scale of the sacrifice required to fix that chaotic reality, be fully understood and appreciated by the entire free-willed creation.
So Hillel and Adam's failures, their manifested sins, provided this necessary public demonstration.
They provided the necessary public manifestation that made the subsequent solution, the cross, meaningful and comprehensible to all observers.
It really sounds like in this specific creation design presented by the sources, the incarnation was always destined to occur. And the fall was the required, public, almost theatrical setting that allowed the true meaning and purpose of that incarnation to be universally validated and understood.
It's a very good way to summarize the argument's trajectory. Yes, the necessity drove the plan, the fall provided the stage.
Okay, let's try to synthesize these threads as we move towards a conclusion. This deep dive has established a really compelling, if challenging, argument from these sources. The incarnation was a necessary structural component for legitimate governance by the law of love.
Right, not just a reaction.
And the fall was the foreknown, chosen vehicle for that necessity to be manifested publicly and effectively.
Exactly. Which brings us squarely back to divine foreknowledge and pre-creation planning. We have to address that head-on to wrap up.
The sources argue God knew Hela would fall. Knew it beforehand. And he chose to use that foreknown failure to establish the cross.
Absolutely. The argument is that the decision was made, effectively, before the foundation of the world. The decision to complete the free will of creatures through the cross.
Which implies?
It implies that Hillel and Adam were placed in their specific vulnerable positions precisely because the cross was the means chosen. In this framework, there wasn't really a plan B that ever got off the drawing board and reached the execution phase. This was, theologically speaking, plan A, a plan built around an anticipated foreknown failure that would necessitate the ultimate demonstration of love.
And Hela's ultimate role in that plan A?
His role, therefore, was known beforehand to be the creature who would freely choose sin, who would then mislead Adam, and who would ultimately, through the systems he set in motion, act as the agent facilitating the death of the second God, the Son, when he incarnated.
Wow.
He served the larger plan. Unknowingly, perhaps, but served it nonetheless. The plan to manifest God's love and justice in the most profound, undeniable way possible through the cross.
This really does dramatically reframe the traditional story, doesn't it? The catastrophe of the fall isn't viewed here as some temporary glitch or a failure of God's initial design,
No.
but rather as the tragic, painful yet necessary execution of a design that used the inevitability of creaturely choice within an imperfect starting state to achieve the necessary final moral outcome. Perfected free will, eternally secured by observing the ultimate sacrifice.
That's the core reframing. It views the negative event as instrumental to the positive pre-planned goal.
However, and this is a big however, we absolutely must introduce the crucial closing caution that the sources themselves provide. We've pushed the logic as far as it goes, but there are limits, right? Limits to human inquiry.
Yes. We've reached the border, you could say, of what created minds can reasonably process or claim to know with certainty.
And why does that boundary exist?
Fundamentally, it exists because of the distinction between the nature of God and the nature of the creature. We, as creatures, exist only within the flow of time. Our entire perception, our logic, it's bound by succession cause, leads to effect. We experience past, present, future sequentially.
But God doesn't experience time that way.
Exactly. God, in classical theology, exists simultaneously in all moments or outside of time altogether. The source material emphasizes that time itself is a created thing, a constraint placed upon the creation, but not a constraint upon the creator.
So when we ask that deep hypothetical question that kind of kicked off this whole deep dive.
If hell hadn't fallen, what method would God have used?
Right. When we ask that, what are we actually doing?
We are essentially asking a question that requires a creature fundamentally bound by time and sequential logic to somehow transcend those constraints and grasp divine, eternal, simultaneous knowledge, to see all possibilities as God might see them.
Which is?
Logically and perhaps metaphysically impossible for us.
We're attempting to impose our created, time-bound logic onto an uncreated, timeless reality. It's like, I don't know, trying to draw a four-dimensional cube perfectly on a two-dimensional sheet of paper.
That's a good analogy. You can capture shadows, hints, projections, but never the full reality itself.
So what's the final caution from the source material? How should we approach this limit?
The caution is quite pragmatic, actually. Created beings only truly know what God chooses to reveal. And what has been revealed in this framework is the reality of the cross as the perfecting mechanism for this creation.
So speculation beyond that.
Speculating excessively about God's hidden plans, or trying to construct detailed hypothetical alternative realities that God might have used outside of the revealed structure.
Yeah.
It's deemed ultimately futile. It serves only to fatigue the mind, the sources suggest, without yielding genuine, reliable knowledge.
So our conclusion really has to be grounded in the reality we've been given, the reality revealed. The cross was preordained to perfect this creation, and the fall was the necessary catalyst within this specific design.
That's the revealed path.
And attempting to figure out some alternative theoretical plan B, especially when God might operate outside our concepts of plan A and plan B entirely, it's just theological overreach. Is that fair?
That seems to be the final message from the sources, yes. We must stick to the revealed truth, that the ultimate sacrifice was presented as necessary not just for redemption after the fact, but for the inherent structural completion of free will itself, planned from before the beginning.
Okay. Let's try and wrap this up then.
To provide a final summary of what has been, I think we can agree, a deeply complex deep dive.
Definitely.
The sources we've examined argue that the second God becoming a creature and undertaking the sacrifice of the cross was not primarily an emergency reaction to hell's failure. Instead, it was an essential structural component, required from the outset to complete the inherent imperfection of created free will and to justly govern creation according to the law of love.
And the fall.
The fall simply provided the foreknown, chosen scenario, the perfect, albeit painful stage, that enabled this fundamental necessity to be revealed publicly, irrevocably, and comprehensibly to all creation.
Okay. And here's the knowledge you now possess, something really critical, I think, to take away and maybe just mull over. The sources establish that for a free-willed creature to reach that great happiness, which is defined as the perfected law of love and eternal security, they must willingly accept the small pain, sacrifice, self-denial.
The necessary cost.
Right. If this structure, this dynamic of necessary self-denial is truly built into the cosmic blueprint, as these sources suggest, how might applying this principle change your approach? Your approach to daily conflicts, maybe disagreements you have, or even long-term personal goals?
That's a challenging thought.
If sacrifice isn't just optional or only for emergencies, but structurally mandatory for perfection, how does that reframe your own moments of yielding, those times you have to give something up? And how does your personal acceptance or rejection of that small pain reflect the necessary cosmic sacrifice we've spent this whole deep dive discussing.
A lot to think about there.
Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.